a lot of this diversity, equality, inclusion stuff is, this is another point I want to make. It's not actually been, we didn't ask for it, so to speak. And by we, I mean the people who they apparently do it for. It's not really been, they didn't ask us. It's kind of been done on our behalf. So I want also people to consider that, like, why are people doing this in the first place? Is it because they really care?
This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 179 for the 4th of April, 2025. The First Amendment to the US Constitution starts, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Our Constitution is not quite so concise. Article 44 of De Valera's Handbook for Governing deals with freedom of religion. Section 1 says, the state acknowledges that the homage of public worship is due to Almighty God. It shall hold his name in reverence and shall respect and honour religion. But then Section 2 hits reverse gear somewhat and starts, freedom of conscience and the free profession and practice of religion are, subject to public order and morality, guaranteed to every citizen. It goes on saying, the state guarantees not to endow any religion, and the state shall not impose any disabilities or make any discrimination on the grounds of religious profession, belief or status. So we have freedom of religion, sort of. Section 4 starts, legislation providing state aid for schools shall not discriminate between schools under the management of different religious denominations. That's a cute bit of phrasing. It says that you can't discriminate between different religious denominations, but it does not prohibit discriminating against non-religious schools or non-religious pupils. It continues saying that legislation must not affect prejudicially the right of any child to attend a school receiving public money without attending religious instruction at that school. So that's where they're throwing a bone to the non-religious, but it's a pretty limited one. It's saying that if a school is receiving public money, which is pretty much all of them, it must allow pupils to attend school without attending religious instruction. So the non-religious are not entitled to protection from discrimination in education in the way that the religious are. You have a right to protection from discrimination for which religion you practice, but not discrimination for being non-religious. The last two sections of the article give special protection to the property of religious denominations. They can't have their property taken away, and they have a right to manage that property and other assets as they see fit. Note that this guarantee about property is given to each religious denomination, but not to any other organization or individual. Religions get special protection for their property, but I want to go back to the supposed right that non-religious pupils have to attend publicly funded religious schools, but skip the religious indoctrination. The Catholic Church and the schools that they run, still the vast majority of the schools in the country, they have a long history of making life as awkward and difficult as possible for parents who don't want their children to be given religious indoctrination. There's no reason why religion classes couldn't be scheduled for Wednesday or Friday afternoons, so those who didn't want to go could go home early. But instead, the bishops instruct each of their schools to have a religion class every day around noon. They also take advantage of the fact that the Constitution says that they can't compel parents to have their children attend, but there's nothing to say what they have to do instead. So a common practice is to tell parents that they, the parents, must make their own arrangements for the children to be taken care of during this period, every single day, right in the middle of the school day. Other schools have told pupils that they must sit in silence in the corner or alone in another room and are not allowed to do homework or even read a book because then everyone else would want to do it. So you can see how some people might look enviously to the version of religious freedom in the US Constitution, even if that doesn't seem to be adhered to so much these days. A lot of people have a lot of opinions about guarantees of religious freedom. I take a different view. I don't think we should have freedom of religion. I don't think we should guarantee it in the Constitution or in the law or anywhere else. We shouldn't give freedom of religion for the simple reason that we don't know what it is. Now, to be clear, I'm not advocating a situation where the government could pass a law sending in squads to close down the churches and synagogues and mosques, or where the state or another employer could impose any sort of sanction on you for believing or not believing in one God or another. But here's the thing. A long while ago, when the Catholic Church was making excuses saying that they had dealt with their rapists according to their own internal rules, Michael McDowell, I think then the Justice Minister, said that the rules of the Catholic Church had no more relevance than the rules of the local golf club. He was wrong and he was right. It was unhelpful to put it in terms that many would find insulting and demeaning, but the message he was trying to convey was correct. No religion can set itself up as a parallel state, and no religion can expect to be treated any different to any other institution. What is freedom of religion? That's the problem. We don't really know. Most people would think about saying prayers or going to Mass, but we already have in the Constitution freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. Those activities would be protected anyway. Should people be denied employment because of their religion? Obviously not, but if it doesn't involve religion, should irrelevant beliefs be a valid reason for discrimination? I think that a much clearer standard would be to say that discrimination on any irrelevant grounds should be prohibited. You shouldn't be discriminated against because you believe in Jesus or Vishnu or L. Ron Hubbard or aliens from the planet Zog if it's irrelevant to the role you're applying for. And that's the point. Putting religious freedom into the Constitution is essentially a black box. Anyone can come along and say that anything is in their black box, and by the nature of religion, we can't tell them that it isn't. And those things could very well include things that justify discrimination. For example, you might have seen some of the videos on social media where sovereign citizen Freeman on the Funny Farm types tried to tell judges or police that the laws don't apply to them. They don't need a driving license, or they don't have to pay their debts or whatever. In the US, those fringe movements have a propensity to say that their belief is based on their religion. Others have said that they will not vaccinate their children or even send them to school, and based their justification on religion as well. Even flat earthers will often say, for some reason, their reading of Christianity tells them not to believe that the earth is round. You or I can laugh at that and point out that there's nothing in the Bible or Christian tradition about a flat earth, but that misses the point. If they say that that's their religion, we can't exactly tell them that it isn't. The Mormon Church was forced to prohibit polygamy under threat of having Utah refused statehood in the US, and a minority of Mormons still reject that change. Up to this point, the crazier outlier beliefs have been swatted aside by courts and wider society, basically refusing to take them seriously. But that informal system breaks down when there isn't such a monolithic mainstream view of what is and is not religious. We are fragmenting as a society, and we're in danger of someone coming up with an interpretation of what they say is their religion that is not nuts enough to ignore, but is nuts enough to cause disruption. The solution is that we must agree which freedoms are allowed for everyone, and agree that there are no other special freedoms that you get depending on which cosmic zombie you believe in or which golf club you're a member of. In a moment we'll have the interview, but first I just want to say thanks to all of the patrons on Patreon. I really appreciate everyone who donates like that. We don't get a huge amount of money out of it, We're not in the same league as some of the big time Irish podcasters that I could mention, but it pays for things like web hosting and phone bills, and Kevin and myself basically donate our time for free. It's also a great morale booster. When we get a new patron on Patreon, it lets us know that there are people out there who listen and who appreciate the podcast. We make a big effort to cover things that are undercovered in Irish media. You're more than welcome to listen for free, but if you think that you could do the same as the other donors and throw in the price of a cup of coffee or even the price of a pint once or twice a month, there's details of how to do that on the website and at the end of the show.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? Follow at Here's How Podcast on Twitter and like Here's How on Facebook for updates on each show's contents.
On the line, I have a young British journalist, Aman Baines. He's been published on Z Network and Desi Blitz. And Aman, I know you describe yourself as a left-wing journalist, which is a great thing to be coming out of university and going into journalism to say. And I was reading an article that you had written, which is titled Why I Believe in Men's Advocacy. And this is going down a path and covering an area that I think is usually more associated with the right. And there's definitely, I think particularly in the US, but also in the UK, been a phenomenon noted that there is, particularly with young people, a gender split whereby young men, males, are noticeably leaning more towards the right and young women noticeably more towards the left. So if you're describing yourself as a left-wing journalist, what are you doing and where are you getting this interest on the men's rights agenda, or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, good question. The first thing I'd say is I wouldn't quite call it men's rights. That's the first thing I'd say. I'd like to see it more as men's advocacy, because men's rights kind of infers something different, something which I'm not really comfortable with. So that's the first thing. But to answer your question, I'd say, well, first of all, it's only become connected to the right wing because the right wing has spoken about it, right? It's not actually a right wing issue. It's not a partisan issue at all. I see it more as a humanity issue. We're talking about, half the human race here. And we're talking about, as we'll get into, some very serious issues, which I think they're not gendered. I mean, men and women will care about them. And just to answer your question of how do I get into this, I suppose I'd say just living, as kind of as weird as that sounds, just kind of walking around, living, experiencing life, and thinking, I don't think that's fair. I think these things are wrong, and these are my beliefs. And yeah, sure, maybe right wingers talk about it more, but if I think a right wing is right about something, even as someone on the left wing, it's totally valid.
Okay, well, to look at, I mean, and for the people who've been perhaps living under a rock or just not online constantly over the past while, there is no question that there is a fairly coherent set of ideas which is associated with a lot of the things around Trump. I think that the Reform Party in your country have been trying to piggyback on that as well, which, and if I was to caricature it, it goes something along the lines of these evil feminists are attacking decent, honest men, and they are excluding and using DEI to exclude men from being considered for jobs that they are qualified for. And we had, I think, largely inaccurately blaming DEI programs for everything from plane crashes to bridges falling down, essentially saying that women who were unqualified were doing these things. And I think most of those turned out to be incorrect. But there is no question that that keys into quite right-wing belief systems. And people may have thought it quietly before, but there are now at least a minority of people who will say out loud things like, in the US, we need to repeal the 19th Amendment, which is the amendment that brought equal voting rights for women. So first of all, can you pick out of that sort of very mixed salad, what are the issues that you would think are valid, or that you, as you say, think might be right within that?
I mean, none of that. Like zero of that, because that's not what I think. That's not really what I'm talking about here. If that's connected to what people think I'm talking about, that's kind of I can't really control that because that's not what I'm saying. I can't, I don't I don't agree with any of that. I mean, I don't see feminism as antithetical to men's advocacy. And I don't see with regards to you saying about DEI and stuff, I mean, I think, well,
DEI, I should say for people,
yeah,
is the mostly American acronym, diversity, equity and inclusion, which is a broad term for programs to diversify, that's to say in various roles, have more women and more ethnic minorities. Sorry, I interrupted you, Damon. Go ahead.
yeah, sure. I obviously think diversity, equality, inclusion is in principle good, although I do actually have some different opinions on that if you if you want to get into it. Um, but the principle, if not always the what they actually do, let's just put it that way. For diversity, equality, inclusion, I obviously agree with I know, and just to be absolutely clear, I obviously believe men and women are equal. Obviously, I don't think there's any differences between men and women in terms of ability to fly planes or intelligence or kindness, the things that really matter, in my opinion, anyway. Kindness, doing the right thing. There's no morality. There are zero differences between men and women. And I have nothing to do with all these. I mean, I am very much against Trump. People who are just saying that men have issues and we should sort this. I don't even know how many of them do support Trump. I think there's quite a lot of people who feel like me. It's just
Okay,
because
then
something's,
let
you
me
know,
let me let me
hmm,
let me get you to focus on. You said why you believe in the title of your article is why I believe in men's advocacy. Give me a couple of things where you think men need advocacy.
yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot, and I think it would actually. I don't think it's
Specifically,
because
specifically, specifically.
so. This is in the UK, but this tracks for most of the world. I'm assuming Ireland as well. The majority of the prison population is male. In the UK, it's 96% compared to women who are 4%. Now, I would expect the percentage of men to be in prison to be higher than women due to testosterone and things like that. But 96 to 4 doesn't track with me. I don't think that's possible if they're men and women treated equally. So that's one thing. The other big thing, possibly to me, just my personal opinion, the biggest thing is that boys are falling behind compared to girls in schools. Again, at least in the UK, I'm not sure what the stats are in Ireland. Um, and I think, that, I mean, to me, that's an absolute disgrace because I think, boys are not less intelligent than girls. So why should they be getting lower marks? And by the way, that's actually changed. That's another thing people should know. 30 years ago, that wasn't the case. So clearly, something has happened across the last 30 years, which have been, but it's bigger than when you don't get a good education, you don't go to university, you don't get a good job, you're more likely to fall into crime. So it's education and all that comes with it. And then also I'd say it might be hard for people to hear, and I don't particularly like talking about it either, but I think we need to domestic and sexual abuse. Obviously women experience the majority of that, but men experience domestic and sexual abuse as well. But the difference is it's given so much less press, and we may get onto this later. Our Labour government has shut down the only sexual abuse hotline for men. Um, I don't know why there wasn't more outrage about that. So these are men's issues. I mean, if at the end of the day, I know it's not even up for debate actually. If a man gets sexually assaulted or victim of domestic abuse, they will not get the help that women get. I'm not blaming women for that. I'm blaming the likes of the government. I'm blaming lots of things, and these are objectively like these things are happening. This isn't up for debate.
Okay,
Men are
that's it.
suffering domestic
That's
and
a good
sexual
few.
abuse.
That's a
Um,
good few topics there. So you have answered my question, which is something that politicians also don't do. So let me look at a couple of those. First and foremost, in schools, and as you said correctly, boys are falling behind in schools. That is a relatively new thing to happen. That is to say, a generation or two ago, that wasn't the case. The reason that it was believed that women were not doing as well in school, let's say 30 years ago, as you put it, was that there was a lack of encouragement, there were a lack of role models and so forth. One thing that is noticeable, and you said correctly, that leads on to how well people do in university and so forth. This is not, as I understand the statistics, this is not a uniform effect. And depending on what university department you go into, you can have really quite remarkable gender splits. So if you're into the computer science department, it's going to be very, very different to in the English literature department. And one thing that you said was that you think men and women are equal. And the definition of equal is more difficult than it might be. Do you think that there is a reason, I don't want to say in biology, but in innate reason, why men and women would, for example, do better in different university departments?
I'm aware of the argument you're making. I've heard it before.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely, absolutely no is my answer, and I'll explain.
Okay,
So,
so you think minus any, if you were to subtract, and it's of course impossible to do, but as a thought experiment, if you were to subtract all societal influence, you would expect men and women to do equally well in computer science and in English literature and in law and in biology and in physics. Okay. So what's the explanation not only for the change in how well boys and girls do in school, but how it is so finely tuned in different subjects?
yeah, I think there's actually a pretty simple explanation for this. So, the first thing I'd say to the people who would argue it's biological is show me the evidence, right? And there isn't. I've looked it up. People have. I'll be fair. There is some evidence, but it's not clear evidence. I should say there's not a scientific consensus. So I err on the side of no. And to answer your question, why is there big differences in a worse society? For This is just a UK centric, or at least Western Europe centric, I guess. But I would say men and women before the last, I don't know, let's say 100 years. Yeah, I think that's fair. 100 years, give or take a few years. Um, had very different gender roles, right? So women were in the home, men went out to work, right? That was what happened, for good or bad. That's what happened, right? And what that meant is that women learned, I would say, the soft skills, and they passed down the soft skills: how to look after children, how to make clothes, all the homemaking skills, so to speak. And this is what happened in the Victorian era. Women were taught different to the men. The women were taught this is how to be a good woman. This is how you know, and the legacy of that is, and the, being in the home and looking after kids, it makes you more, you have to be more empathetic because you're better with your words. Hence, you're better at, say, subjects like English. And I just think it's a legacy of that. I genuinely do. The modern era where, women go to work in almost equal numbers now. But that's quite a new phenomenon, and these legacies take a long time to get rid of. So
Sure.
I just say it's
So you're
legacy
saying
of that.
the legacy of essentially a very sexually, I don't want to necessarily say sexist, but sexually divided society where there were
Yes,
very strict gender roles. And
yes,
it is
exactly.
notable that the topics in the West, the university subjects which women do better in, can be covered essentially by two things: reading and caring. So law, literature, the humanities, and so forth, languages, and to a slightly lesser degree, but within science, biology is more female dominated. And the other subjects, the harder sciences and the essentially more career focused things like architecture and so forth, remain more male dominated. So you're saying that is a legacy of going back now, maybe 100 years or probably more.
Yeah, and I'd add another thing if you don't mind. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
not just that. It's the legacy, and it's how society treats girls and boys. If you have a inherent bias
Mm-hmm.
from the start, from a very young age, the boys like the reading, sorry, the girls like the reading, the boys like their maths and the science, and the boys like, messing around and playing sport, and the girls like, sitting down. If you have that inherent bias,
Mm-hmm.
that's what the kids end up as. And I mean, ultimately, the biggest argument I say to that is, well, if I take myself, I never liked maths. I never liked science. I always liked reading and history and English. Um,
Yeah,
but
but you can't go from the particular to the general quite that.
yeah, but I suppose I'm making a point. I mean, I do not feel that I was treated the same as the girls in relation to that, in relation to, oh, this guy would be good at that. No, I don't. I think I wasn't. And
Okay.
and equally, I'd say probably a woman in a maths class or a computer science would probably be treated the same. I think these inherent biases. If you treat someone as stupid, they will just turn off, right?
Sure. Yeah,
I mean,
that's
so
absolutely true. And
is
people
I'd
get
say
inspired.
So I'd say so.
No, but let me because I
Yeah,
want to stay
sorry,
focused on this. And you come from, I think you said to me before we started recording, a Punjabi background. I don't know if you're on the
yeah,
Indian or the Pakistani side of
India,
that,
yeah,
but it is notable that although in the West those gender splits in university subjects are really still quite strong, we don't have the same pattern, for example, across the board. I don't know about India, but I do know about
mm,
Pakistan. And the other country that is, I think, notable for this is Iran. Those hard science, engineering, mechanical engineering, civil engineering, computer sciences, they're female dominated. And a theory, I don't know if I can say it's the leading theory or that I would necessarily subscribe to, but a at least plausible theory of why that's the case is that one route out of the home for young girls in, as you will know, very conservative, particularly Islamic societies where young girls are very controlled by their fathers, often also by
mm,
their brothers. One route out of that is university, and they'll do whatever the hell they can to get into university. And if that means doing mechanical engineering, they will. And if that means doing computer science, they will. But if you flip that to Norway, where no doubt our hordes of Norwegian listeners will be able to point to some inequalities that may still exist in Norway, but I don't think anybody could remotely argue the point that gender equality is vastly more advanced in Nordic countries and also in countries perhaps slightly less so in Ireland and other Western European countries than it is in Iran and Pakistan, meaning that girls have more free choice, and when they choose, when they don't have that societal pressure, they are choosing the more stereotypically caring and reading subjects. That tends to undermine your point, doesn't it?
no,
Oh,
sure, I would
tell me
say.
why not.
So the first thing I should say here is although I'm a Punjabi background, I mean, I would say I'm English, born and bred
Mm,
English. So I don't really know what's happening in Punjab because I am born and bred English. So I just want to get that point out in the first place.
sure.
Although I am aware of what's happening, and again, this isn't actually my ethnic background anyway, but I'm aware of, the countries like Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, obviously, are deeply, let's say, conservative. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way in regards
That's
to
very
gender.
kindly.
Yeah, finally, yeah. And that's obviously bad. And I hear what you're saying. You're basically saying when women are, well,
And
and
this is a
men.
point made by a lot of people
I
on the
get,
right, there's Jordan Petersons and those sorts
yeah,
of things.
yeah, yeah.
They will say, hang on a sec, this
Yeah,
proves that this is an innate gender difference, that
no,
women really just want to cuddle babies and read novels by Jane Austen.
no.
Um,
But I really hate this argument because and it's not just it's part of why I say I believe in men's advocacy. It's sexist against men as well because it's basically saying like I care about people. I'm not. You Jordan Peterson, you may be a psycho, but I'm not. Like I don't really know what he's talking about. I mean, and in regards to okay, because then you could say, well, how do you explain Denmark and
yeah,
Ireland and
so
things
how
like
do
that?
you explain that?
And what I would say to that is, I don't have all the answers,
Hmm.
and it is a fair point. I'll hold my hands up. I don't have all the answers, but I would go back to what I said a few minutes ago. I think it's more societal. If you treat people from a young age, teachers who are mostly female, by the way, that's another big factor here. The vast majority of teachers are female, especially in the younger years. I also think that needs to change because I don't think it's. I think that's
That is a point you will hear on that sort of
yeah.
manosphere, that sort of whole, I won't call it necessarily movement, but there's
No,
a cloud of different semi-associated ideologies.
yeah.
I don't know if it's centered, but certainly Jordan Peterson would be part of it, and they would certainly argue that this is a negative thing, that boys don't, especially young boys, may not have, a male role
Yeah,
model.
but I don't see what's right wing about it.
Mhm.
Isn't that just like common sense that men, boys need male role models in the same way that women need? If okay, let's put it this way. If in the UK, right, 85% of primary school teachers are women, right?
Mhm.
15% are men. That is not an issue in and of itself. But it clearly is an issue when we are seeing boys in primary schools do so much worse than the girls. There's clearly a reason for that. They're not just more stupid. So if we just if we just assume they should be doing the same, why we're not doing the same? To me, it seems like a pretty good explanation. 85% of the teachers are women, they can't relate to them, right? If the script was flipped, if 85% of primary school teachers were men, 15% women and the girls, sorry, were doing worse, I'd say the same thing. So this isn't about men and women. It's just saying boys are doing worse in school. there's a clear minority of teachers who are men, to me that seems like a rational explanation. I think boys clearly need male role models, and that's completely valid. It's not. I think that's from a young age, boys can see they're not like the girls, so they need a male role model. Of course they do. I
Okay.
don't see I don't see what's right wing about that.
And arguing that point, but if you're coming from the left, as you're very kind of upfront about it, that does provide a difficulty in terms of coherence. Because if you are, let's say, on the right in the US, if you're on the J.D. Vance type of, in that political zone, that's a fairly coherent set of ideas to say, hey, look at these subjects, that this division of subject choice, for example, at university level, this shows that women are good at caring, men are good at doing stuff and making stuff. And that keys into the point that you're making about a lack of male role models, for example, primary school teachers. And where you can disagree with it, and I certainly would, but you can't argue that the worldview of somebody like J.D. Vance has an internal irreconcilable inconsistency, but he could probably argue that of you.
How so? I don't really understand why my.
Well, to move on, because you also mentioned prisons, and you're saying,
Mm,
and it's a perfectly valid thing to say, men and women are equal, that you expect, minus any societal pressures, you would expect a 50-50 split in every profession. But
yes, I would. Yeah.
but you did say that you think that a 96-4 split in the prison population is completely wrong. You would expect, because of testosterone, still, even all other
Yeah.
things being equal,
Yeah.
far more men to go to prison. But testosterone doesn't just play a role in crimes. For example, I'm aware there was one study of Wall Street traders and testosterone levels that were tested. This was a properly done scientific test that literally done with blood tests before each day. And there was a very strong link between risk-taking behavior and between performance of Wall Street traders trading millions and billions and their testosterone levels. Surely that could be extended to, that's a very male-dominated field, by the way. That could be a reasonable biological explanation why it's a male-dominated field.
Yeah. So, am I allowed to go back on the education issue? Because that's something I really wanted to
Absolutely, go
say.
right ahead.
So I will answer your question, but I just have something I really want to say here. I do want to make the point. I don't want us to come out as what I don't want a debate to be is let's figure out why women do better in English and men do better in maths. To me, that's missing the point. Because let's just say for the sake of argument, just for the sake of argument, boys do better in maths because they're boys, basically. Biology, blah blah blah, whatever. Women do better in English, right? Okay, so but it should even out, right? At the end of their school experience, it should even out. The A stars or Bs or whatever it is, 9-1 now, should be even, but it's not. Even forget the subject, but as an overall, as an on aggregate, boys do worse. So so to me, it's kind of missing the point. Why are boys doing worse? Not
So
just
there's been a shift in society. Something has clearly changed.
yeah, and I think
One of the things,
yeah,
let me put it to you, one of the things has changed, that may have changed, is
yeah,
that girls are given encouragement, and I would use that in a very broad sense. So that might be, like overt, deliberate
yeah,
encouragement or other much more subtle and perhaps unconscious influences. Girls are being now given far more encouragement to do well academically and are responding to that. And again, that provides a problem with you if you're taking a position that there is zero biological input into that, isn't it?
mm. No, I think I believe without society and without governments pushing all this nonsense, men and women should at the end of school get basically the same grades and basically the same amount should go to university. That
Mhm.
is not what's happening. Less boys are doing worse in school and far less boys are going to university than girls. Therefore, we need boys and men's advocacy.
Uh-huh.
That's basically my
So,
argument
so
in a nutshell.
your solution to that
Hmm.
is, in terms of advocacy, that is to have somebody at the top table, thumping that table, saying that the interests of boys as well as girls should be catered to in decision making, be it government level or at a
I
school teacher meeting.
Yeah, but it's bigger than that. I mean, this is getting to quite deep stuff now, which is, I suppose, is kind of the point. I guess so it's fine. But I, I wrote this in the article as well. It's so the first, well, in terms of solution, I'd say, well, we need more male teachers. That's just, 85% of them being women. I think it on some level that angers me, to be honest with you, because I'm thinking that's not right. I'm sorry, that is not right. That is not
Okay,
acceptable because
finish your point. I will ask you about that,
and
but finish your point.
yeah, and it's not because they're women. It's because the boys are doing worse and they clearly need a male role model. So it's in the interest of everyone. And by the way, just to make a point, half of you know, mums
Mm.
who give birth to boys, this isn't a male female issue. It's in the mum's interest of these boys to have a good education. Having I believe, I genuinely believe, I can't prove it. I believe if we had a more equal split in the men and women in primary schools, it wouldn't decrease the girls' grades, but it would slightly increase the boys' grades. That's my belief. Anyway, so that's the first thing. But the second thing I'd say is, when I wrote this in the article, it might seem that this isn't falsifiable, this isn't scientific, but I want to make the point anyway because I do believe in it, and I think if we look at The Simpsons, right, and this does sound ridiculous, but just hold tight. The stupid kid in the family is the boy, Bart, right? The smart one's Lisa. You think of South Park, the boys are these stupid idiots, and Futurama even, Fry's the idiot and Leader's the
Yeah.
smart one. And, if there's a scene for that, if you push that onto young kids, right, and the adults, it creates a bias, and I believe there is in people's heads, young boys they're idiots, or they're more boisterous and they're more silly
Mhm.
and they're more likely to get mucky and they're less likely to sit down and write. But if you believe that inherently, that's what they're going to become.
Oh, okay. Pause on that because I want to address two things that you said. Number one,
Yeah,
I
sure.
think a genesis of what you said, and there's no question of that gender distribution in terms of the type of caricature that you're talking about, particularly the Bart versus Lisa
Mm,
thing. If you were one of the writers of people creating that, comedy and probably all drama needs that type of fool. Idiot
mm,
is the wrong word, but that type of character who is the comic, the foil for that. It would seem, particularly when those characters were created, it would have been very difficult to make them female because of the level of sensitivity to that at the time. They're all like 30 years old or more at this stage. That's,
mm,
I suspect, what the genesis of that is. It may now, the cumulative effect of that happening over many different types of media and comedy and so forth. It wouldn't, I think, to add to your point, it wouldn't have been possible to have a character in Friends like Joey who
mm.
was female. That just wouldn't have worked. But the one thing I want to question you about is you say it's just wrong to have only 15% male primary school teachers. That's
Yeah.
a moral statement. That's a moral claim. Why is it just wrong?
It's not because they're women, right? That's the first thing. It's not because they're women. I mean, if this was a inconsequential, if this was like
Well,
I,
for example, feminists may
yeah,
say that
yeah.
you have, I don't know the exact figure, but I think it's fairly similar, gender bias amongst pilots against women.
But I would say to that, if women wanted more female pilots, I support them.
Okay,
I'm not.
but
I'm not against them.
the question then is how do you achieve that? Because if you were to believe that we are, and I don't necessarily think it's true, but if you were to believe that we're currently hiring just the best people for the job, would you be happy to fly in a plane if you felt that that principle was being overruled by saying, no, we have to have gender equality? And can you do the same in terms of primary school teachers? Can you say, well, here's a whole cohort of women who are better qualified for the job, but we're not going to give it to them because we need to have some men in on the job?
Yeah, but fair point, fair point. And you give me something to think about there. You don't want to not give job to someone because they're a woman, right?
Uh-huh.
You don't want to do that. But there is a shortage of, I believe, anyway. I believe there's a shortage of teachers anyway. I think it's one
Yeah,
of the
for sure.
most
Yeah.
stressful jobs, some of that. So I don't think, I could be wrong, it would take away jobs from women. I don't think that would happen. To have more men. I think we need more teachers in general. No, but it is a fair point. I don't really have an answer to that. I mean, this is also why, going back to DI, I don't actually agree with it, even as a minority myself, because I think it kind of it creates more problems then it fixes for me in lots of ways. I agree with the principle, but the implementation, I think, is it just annoys people basically.
Okay.
Um, and yeah,
One of those that I think the distinction is has been artificially created, but artificially or not, it has been created and it exists. And the distinction is apparently between equality and equity, and this has come to mean, and I think this does not have a very strong basis in linguistics, but this has come to mean the difference between giving people equality of opportunity and between forcing an equality of outcome regardless of merit. In other words, saying, yeah, here's a whole bunch of well-qualified pilots or well-qualified primary school teachers, and those pilots, there's too many men, so we're not going to hire them, we're going to hire less qualified women, or the reverse for primary school teachers. Give me your thoughts on equity versus equality.
yeah. So I do have an answer to that. So if we lived in a society which had no discrimination, right,
Mm-hmm.
then we could have this argument. But we don't live in that society, so it's a non-argument. It's like, okay, well, if you look at, say, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example where it's kind of, you know, I can't remember on the top of my head. Maybe perhaps, I was going to say CEOs there, but I actually think there's something else going on there. I can't think of a really gendered split thing, right? Or a place where, black people or Asian people don't do as well. A lot of these things are because of, I mean, it's not even, I don't see how the right wing can even argue it sometimes. It obviously is because of implicit bias in some cases. So how do we fix that, right? Um, so this idea of equity, I'd say if there's a job where the split is because of legitimate reasons, cultural or for gender, biological, fine. We should have no diversity, equality, inclusion, fine. But if you have a job where 50% of the people who apply for it are women, and in the actual job only 10% are, clearly something's gone wrong there. If you have a job where 10% of the people who apply to it are a minority, and when it actually comes to the job, it's 1%, is clearly a problem there. So it should be tailored based on the job and the position. I mean, it is a difficult one, but the other thing I'd say to that is that a lot of this diversity, equality, inclusion stuff is, this is another point I want to make. It's not actually been, we didn't ask for it, so to speak. And by we, I mean the people who they apparently do it for. It's not really been, they didn't ask us. It's kind of been done on our behalf. So I want also people to consider that, like, why are people doing this in the first place? Is it because they really care?
Okay. Do you think that, for example, I moved with testosterone from prison to Wall Street
Mm.
traders? Do you think it's reasonable to guess that there may be some professions that, for very hard biological reasons, women would gravitate towards?
Possible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I haven't seen the evidence.
You
So,
seem to be not quite denying it, but reluctant to go down that. How then do you explain that when you go in extremis from
mm,
Pakistan to Norway, that you get much more female domination and women being much more concentrating in caring roles in the societies, and you can say that they're
yeah,
imperfect, but in the societies where
yeah, sorry.
where there's clearly far less gender discrimination, for example, Norway.
I'd say that's right. If we had a perfectly equal society, which we don't, and these disparities existed, I would hold my hands up and say, you know what? I was wrong. It was biology. But
Uh-huh.
we're not even close to that. It's even Denmark and Sweden and Ireland, and yeah, we're not even close. And not just against women, against men. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So if we talk about caring roles, things like that, do we treat boys as caring? Do adults implicitly treat the boys as, oh, they will be caring compared to the girls? No, we don't. We assume they will be less caring. We assume they will like sports. Not all boys like sports. I personally like sports, but not all of them will. But I can guarantee you, if you go into schools in Ireland or UK or Denmark and you look at the primary schools, I can guarantee you anything, the teachers, and I'm not saying they're doing it consciously, they will subconsciously treat the girls and the boys differently. The girls they will assume to be more caring, the boys they will assume to be less caring. They will assume the boys want to play football, they will assume the girls don't want to. So we need to sort that out first. We can't really have this biological argument until we get rid of that. And we're so far away from that because we don't even discuss it. I mean, the idea that, you know, this I would like to, just from a men's advocate point of view, to go back to kind of what we're talking about here. I would like to see a society that treats men less with judgment and less assumptions that they will be implicitly non-empathetic, violent, and treat them as, I'm assuming you will be empathetic. I'm not going to assume you like maths more than English. I'm not going to assume you want to play football over writing poetry or singing. I'm going to treat you the same. I think if we did that, we would see we wouldn't see the disparities we do now. And I think talking about Denmark and Ireland and stuff, they're not even close to doing that. Like they're not.
Mm. They are
Yeah,
closer than some countries in the world.
yeah. I hear what you're saying, but
Okay,
yeah,
let me then focus on. And I think you've answered on that. I don't want to beating the same dead horse.
yeah. But I just want to say these are complex issues, by the way. So I don't
yeah.
have all the answers.
Okay,
I was
that's
upset about
that's
that,
fair enough.
yeah.
But this is an area of issues that has been fairly slowly gaining momentum, and probably that's accelerating to quite a degree. And as we've seen now, causing, it would appear, or at least being associated with a measurable split in voting behaviour. And I think that does exist in the UK. Don't think it has existed to such an extent as it has, particularly in the last election in the US, but it certainly exists. And from, as you say, a left-wing point of view, you can say, you can perhaps put it kindly, that the political right have seen an opportunity and exploited it. You would have to say that the left has missed a trick on this. Is there a degree to which the left sort of reflexively agreed with anything that seemed to be feminist because they felt that was in their wheelhouse? And the phrase that is even outside, people who are very politically committed, the phrase that is used very often is gone too far. How would you react to just someone in the pub saying feminism has gone too far?
I would say what I understand to be real feminism, from what I've been told by women, right? No, because to me, real feminism includes boys, right? But what has happened in reality, and definitely on social media, I mean, definitely, is unacceptable. And
Which
that
is,
is, I mean, where do we start? So this is going to be quite a conversation. And this is a real thing. People can use a Wayback Machine on the internet if you want to do this. If you go to Twitter before Musk, right,
yeah,
you would have hashtags, and they do it every couple of months just for fun, I guess. Hashtag men are trash, hashtag kill all men, hashtag men are this, men are that. The boys did, and there was loads of like memes and silly things like, oh, the boys like this, the boys like that. Male tears, that's one I'd like some apologies for, by the way. There's so much talk about we need to get men to talk, and then you're making fun of men for crying, right?
yeah.
That's oh yeah, that makes sense, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's just
So, okay.
nonsense.
So
So
what
say,
you're referring to, for the people who
yeah,
have touched grass in the last few years,
yeah, it's very online.
is essentially perhaps a performative
Yes,
extreme feminism.
yeah.
And isn't it a failure of the left that when you had what was really just very narcissistic behavior that was modeling itself into a particular political pose, it was a failure of the left to just not outright reject that from the get-go, wasn't it?
Correct. You basically got it. I don't know if I want to say this next bit. I might. Yeah, I'm going
Go
to
on.
say it.
Go ahead.
I'd also say it doesn't just apply to men and women. I think
Uh-huh.
a lot of the left, and I include myself on the left, so not all of the left, but I will attack my side here. And by the way, that's something I like to do almost on a daily basis.
Go ahead.
I enjoy attacking my own side because I think I've gone kind of nuts. This kind of oppressor narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I mean by that is, in a lot of people's heads, not all the left, but too many of the left. Men are the oppressors, women are the
Mm-hmm.
oppressed, right? And throughout history, they're not wrong, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But to look and, racial, the same thing, white
Yeah,
people
yeah,
are the
yeah, yeah.
oppressors, and, you can even do straight and LGBT, all these
Yeah.
type of things. And they're not completely wrong, but when they take it to its literal end goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
They end up justifying things like men are trash. And you'll get articles, and there's a Huffington Post article And I believe the headline was something like, I can't remember it verbatim, something like why men are trash is like not what you think it is, or
Yeah.
and basically trying to defend it. And I'm thinking, like you said, just outright, it's outright discrimination. It's outright quite a nasty thing to say. Why can't you just
But
condemn
there
it?
are
So
always,
so 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 so
there are
the left,
always idiots at
yeah,
any
but
point in time. The failure was of
yeah,
the mainstream and political left
yeah,
to disassociate itself from
yeah,
that.
correct. Yes, yeah, yeah. I I
Okay.
I I, ba- I basically agree. Yeah,
And it is, like, I think it's not going too far to say that, and I don't think it explains the entire thing, not by a mile, but that is a non-zero portion of that shift of males to the right that we've seen in Western countries. And that was landed on and exploited, I would think, by Trump. Probably is not cute enough to have done that, but people around him. And my fear on that, when I see some things that are manosphere type content that you do see online, is that there is a danger of that also happening, of just unthinkingly accepting other canards of the left. For example, that men and women must be equal. We believe that to be true because that's what's carved on the altar that we pray at. Therefore, we have to find some reason to explain any apparent non-equal outcome.
and I hear what you're saying, and you've made a lot of points there which have kind of undermined my central
Yeah.
at the start. And I hear what you're saying, but I would say, okay, okay, this is perhaps a good way to summarize it, I guess. I'd say, look, men and women are on the important things,
Hmm.
right? On the important things. Maybe we can, like, if someone shows you some data that men are better at maths and fine, whatever, but on the important things, right? Overall intelligence in terms of on aggregate, right?
Yeah.
Empathy,
Hmm.
definitely. Morality, they are, I believe, I know, I don't even care. I know they're the same because I've
Hmm.
lived life and I lived with myself and I lived with women. I know that's true.
Hmm.
And yet we are seeing, we are not seeing that play out in society. Let's just put it that way. So clearly there's something going wrong. And in regards to the left, I would say it's not feminism gone too far. It's, call it wokeism, call it what you want. I don't know. Liberalism. You can blame it on whatever you want. It's that, so to speak, not really. Whatever is the ideology that says men are trash is a good slogan. That's the ideology I'm attacking. I'm not attacking feminism, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes any sense. Um, and in the article I wrote on the Z Network, I described it as a sort of corporate feminism, like
Hmm.
a, I don't, and also, no, but I also will be fair here. I mean, there were people. I think there's a very like Jamila Jamil, right? I mean, I can't stand her. I mean, some of the things she
Hmm.
says, I think they're so inflammatory.
She's a singer.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
She's like a public professional celebrity, basically. As far as I mean, some of the things she says are so inflammatory, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking, I as a man, why would I listen to you? If you're a feminist, right, and you want men to come to your side, why would I listen to you when you're saying these things, which are just like they're inflammatory, they're not very nice, you know. So, but on the whole, I mean, the academic feminists or the average woman in society. Okay, let's put it this way: the average woman in society cares about boys. Yeah, I don't think it's a gender split. I'm not blaming women or anything like that. Um, I think this is it's not a gendered issue. It's a societal issue, which we should all work towards. You know.
Amon Baines, journalist from the UK, published on Z Network and Desi Blitz and others. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Go to the website for sources and references from the show. And while you're there, you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, and go and see the work of Amon Baines at thebainesagenda.com. Get in touch if you want to suggest a guest or a topic for a future show. And thanks again to all of the patrons on Patreon. That helps us cover the costs of keeping the podcast going. And if you could throw in a couple of euro once or twice a month, please do go and sign up at patreon.com/here'show. That link is on the website, Also, there you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All of that information is at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. The co-producer is Kevin Wolf. Thank you for listening.